welcome to Inside the Recording Studio. I am Jody Whitesides, and with me today is Mr. Chris Hellstrom.
Hello, Jody. How's it going?
I'm alive and not unwell.
Good.
How about you?
You've been under the weather for a little while here, so I'm glad you're sounding better.
Thank you. It's good to be sounding better.
Yeah, back from the dead, huh?
Improvements in life.
Yay, life goals. Are you living your best life, Jody?
I'd like to think so.
Yeah, at least the best under the circumstances that were dealt, huh?
Yeah, something of that nature.
Yeah. Awesome. Have you had a good week?
You know, some good things have happened. I can't complain.
Yeah.
And other things not so good, but I'm still not going to complain.
It's almost like life, huh?
Almost. Just a
good
little
things happen
bit.
and then bad things happen.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, it's about to get a lot better.
Oh, it is. Is it? Why is that? Do tell.
Because we're talking drums today.
Oh, drums. Yes. The fascinating smacks of life.
Yes. And we're talking acoustic drums. We're not talking program drums. That's another podcast.
Is it really?
It is.
Are you sure?
And we will do one as well. Yes.
Okay.
But today we're talking acoustic drums. And I want to mention, too, that we're not necessarily going to go into the nitty-gritty here about which microphone to use with this and that, but this is a little bit more of an overarching type of a vibe here.
Kind of like the others we've already kind of done.
Yeah, going along the same line here. So hopefully some good tips and tricks, and at least...
How many do you think we can name in terms of tips and tricks? 4? 5?
Oh, I'd like to hope that there's more than that.
7? 10?
Yeah. Well, let's do a tally at the end of the
and I can't count very well because I put 7 like this, which is actually like 8.
Well, U.S. school system, right?
That's right.
Right. I have these many.
Yes, this many.
No, but we are talking drums, so we're talking about miking up an actual kit in an actual room.
Not this room, mind you.
No.
Probably not your room
either.
Right now either.
No, not there either. But I guess the first generalities goes to what we always say. What do we always say when we go into the studio with your instrument?
Know your gear?
Yeah, well, but make sure everything is in working order. If you're tracking drums and you're taking the time to rent a studio and have somebody there, don't show up with garbage heads that don't sound like anything. So,
what constitutes a garbage head? Toilet paper?
Something that sounds like toilet paper.
Well, you might be right.
Yeah, and I mean, hey, if you're going with like a super lo-fi thing, maybe that's the order of the day. So here's the first drink, all the context of the song. Right?
That's right. Shot number 1 just went out.
Right. Wow, a couple of minutes into it. This is going to be a long day for somebody, or a long evening, hopefully. No, but the obvious things that make sure, your kit sounds good. If you're one of those drummers that is not super comfortable with tuning your own kit, get somebody that can. Or
I think that's a good suggestion.
Yeah, and I'm not necessarily even talking about tuning your toms and minor thirds or anything like that, like Terry Bozzio or something. But
hey, that's a cool idea.
That is a cool idea. But just making sure that the toms sound good or the whole kit sounds good, right? So,
well, that's a pretty big tall order, isn't it?
It is,
because that's a choice of drum heads, and then you've got to tune them, and then it comes to set up in the actual room. Where are you going to place them?
Right.
So
if you're in a room where you haven't been before or tracked before, ask the engineer, where do you guys usually set up? And he will tell you, we usually set up here, and heed their advice.
Well, hopefully heed their advice.
Right. No, I want to be on the big riser because it's going to look awesome or whatever.
That's right. I need to look awesome while I'm recording.
Right. Hey, that's very important.
For some people, yeah.
Yeah.
Unless you're shooting
No,
a music video, then of course you got to look something.
yeah.
Look the part.
And if you're in an 80s rock video, you're going to be at the Spark Factory where there's going to be just like
drum twirling
lights
sticks,
going off and you got to do the stick twirls.
Stuff. Yeah.
Absolutely. Wow, we got off track really quickly there.
No, not really.
But yeah, so make sure your kit sounds good. And the other thing that I think is really important, and I think you're going to agree with me, is don't have any more kit pieces than you're actually going to use for the song.
Well, wait a second. You know, if I'm Neil Peart, that's a lot of stuff.
Well, but he's going to use probably all of that.
Yeah,
right?
there's a good possibility of it.
Yeah. I mean, if you're lucky enough to record Neil Peart, I'd say you let him do whatever the hell he wants, right?
Well,
but
that might be tough now, seeing as he's taking serious cases of smelling
away,
salts to make that happen.
Yeah,
So.
unfortunately. But yes, but let's say Terry Bozzio then, or somebody like that has this big ostinato kit or whatever. But the reason I bring that up, and I think it's important, is the more stuff you have, the more chances you have of getting noise in your recording. Something's vibrating, something's rattling, and it's
but that's real when it comes to acoustic, man.
Yeah, but it's real when it comes to acoustic, but it's really, really annoying in a mix.
Yeah, it can be. I agree with that.
Yeah, so little things like that to just kind of take care of that beforehand, and you're likely to get a lot better results.
There is this truth. You know, actually, there are sessions that I have done where it's literally kick, snare, and hi-hat.
Sure.
And if the drummer can kick ass on a groove with just that, the song is going to rock.
Yeah. Yeah. Obviously, again, sip number 2, whatever musical style you're playing with is going to call for different kits.
That is program dependent, isn't it?
Yeah, it is program dependent, depending on the song, man.
That's right.
So, but that, sort of lends itself to all of that. If you're doing, let's say that you're playing more of a proggy type of thing where you've got boatloads of tom fills and this and that, well, then you need everything there but if you're playing, let's say that you're doing like a jazz trio or something like that, well, maybe you don't need the Peter Criss 77 drum kit, So, yeah, you only set up what you're actually going to use, I think, and everybody would be happier for it.
Sage advice right there.
Absolutely. I think so. But yeah, it's just one of those things, because I mean, sitting around and then after everything is tracked and you didn't notice it at the session, and then you hear, oh, there's a rattle somewhere, and then try to, track that down, and then maybe you have to send files to like RX to kind of get rid of stuff because it's too annoying. So it's just easier to take care of that first.
Right up front.
Less stuff to fix.
Get it done.
Right? Yeah. So we talked about having that and the kit size. That brings up a next issue.
Which is?
How many mics are you going to use?
Ooh.
How are you going to mic the kit?
I say, well, at least 2 mics per drum.
At least.
At least.
Right? Yeah.
If you're really awesome, you go 3.
Right? Yeah, and then there will be no phase issues or anything
None
like that.
whatsoever. None.
No.
None.
But in all seriousness, there are a couple of things that will, determine what's best for you. The one big thing is obviously how you're tracking. I mean, how many inputs do you have? If you have an 8-put interface, let's say.
8 input.
8 inputs.
There you go.
Isn't that what I said?
Yeah, you said 8 put. It's almost like shot put, only different.
Yeah, not the output, the input. If you got 8 inputs, well, then you're not getting more than 8.
Well, that's not necessarily true.
That's not necessarily true, because if you have a mixer, you can kind of
in front of it.
Right, but then you're also faced with, then you have to sort of mix on the fly there, whatever is going to go through there. So if you have to, then that's what you do. But your inputs generally will, determine how many mics you at least can use. The other thing is, of course, how many mics do you own, or how many are available to you at the studio, or however you're tracking. If you go into a big room, that's probably going to be less of an issue, because
it would be really fun if you had like 50 Neumann U47s.
Yeah,
that'd be a real expensive mic locker, but wow, wouldn't that be fun?
Well, it would be fun, yeah. I mean, if you have that many Neumanns, why don't we just sell them and move to the Maldives or something? But in all seriousness, I'm going to say it again. Whatever you're tracking, if you're doing the prog thing or something, if you're doing like more of a modern metal type of thing, you might need to mic everything. But if you're not, you can do whatever's appropriate. Kick, snare, and an overhead, or 2 overheads. That's 4. You could, if you only have one mic, just one room mic, you might get lucky. But just thinking about placement and
one room
pick
mic,
up as much as you
isn't
can.
that like the quote unquote apparent secret to the giant "When the Levee Breaks" drum sound in Led Zeppelin's album? Wasn't it a single room mic somewhere that they used for that?
I think there was something in like a hallway or something like that.
Like a giant stairwell or something that they used.
Right.
That was like, we placed this one mic and that was it. Okay, great. That's awesome. So it's possible to get a good killer drum sound out of a single mic if your drummer knows how to play extremely well and you have a good place to place that mic.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, everything is possible because it's a beautiful world, but
except for breathing in space without help.
Yeah. But that will, it presents its own set of challenges. Like you said, if the things that should go without saying again, it's like whatever your instrument, if you have, but I think especially when you're tracking something like this, for a drummer to be able to control his or her dynamics when they play.
Very
so like
important.
One snare is not up here and the next one is here, when it's supposed to be like an even drive type of a thing. So,
and I'm assuming you mean when one snare hit is loud and one is soft.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I'm showing with my hands. So it's hard to hear.
That's right. It's hard to hear what Chris is doing when he's showing with his hands.
Yeah. So, all of those things go into what we're trying to accomplish, I guess.
Hell yeah.
But what is that? The Glenn Johns method, is that 3 or 2 mics even? Or I'm sorry, 3 or 4.
I feel like I'm under pressure. Dun, 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 dun. I don't know.
Yeah.
Off the top of my head, I don't.
Right. Because I think it was one of those things. It might have been like kick, snare, and a pair of overheads, or maybe even just the kick and 2 overheads or something like that to kind of pick up enough of the toms and the snare to kind of do that. If that's what you have at your disposal, try it out. But before you start tracking, make sure that you have a good balance of the kit, because it's a lot more difficult to get any changes after that.
It can be, if you're not using individual mics. So you're kind of talking like this Glenn Johns method. That would be like a GJM compared to the KIS.
Say that again.
Glenn Johns method compared to Keep It Simple.
Yeah. I mean, I suppose they're related, but you just have to know a little bit more about the first one, I guess.
See, you give me a weird offhand quiz, I'm going to give you weird offhand anacronyms.
Oh, so now it's on now. Yeah, all these abbreves.
Yes.
So, but I mean, I think tracking drums can be very, very, enjoyable, but it is difficult if you're not super comfortable doing it. It's a lot harder because there's more stuff to mess up than if you're just micing a guitar cab or something like that.
Well, the biggest issue becomes phasing between the mics, and we kind of hinted at that already.
Right. The phasing and bleed in between mics and all this kind of stuff. So, something that you definitely want to check out as you're tracking it. It's not that the phase issue can't be done or fixed afterwards, but again, the less cleanup work you have to do after the fact, I think, is better. Yeah, it's just quicker and easier.
Yeah. So essentially that kind of comes into, are you going to close mic everything and then just have stereo overheads, or are you going to do a combination of close mics and room mics, or in the Led Zeppelin case, room mics only?
Right.
And that again becomes
dependent on the song, depending on the arrangement. Yep.
That means take another shot.
Yeah. So lots of little things to think about, but
so how do you check for potential phase issues? What would be your trick?
Well, my trick would be just listening, right? You move the mics a little bit and you see if all the bottom end goes away really quickly or drastically changes the sound. There are also, things that you can do in your DAW if you're checking that, just actually zooming in on the waveforms and seeing if they are moving against each other, so to speak, as opposed to with each other. Yeah. But generally during tracking, as a little bit of an A-side to what I'm about to say, is I rarely, or at least the last few times I've been tracking drums, there hasn't been a whole lot of outboard gear involved. And when I say a whole lot, I mean none. So
how are you getting those mics into the interfaces then?
Well, but I'm talking about compression and EQ and preamps and that sort of thing. Right. So everything has been generally in the interface. So not so much besides switching the polarity in the DAW on the, just checking and listening for it that way, but then just kind of moving it around to making sure it just sounds good. And then,
well, that's the age-old adage, isn't it? If it sounds good, it is good.
Right. So in those cases, that would be my primary goal, to just make sure everything sounds good going in. And then, unless there are obvious phase issues, you mess around with that. But mic placement will get you 90% there, right? So
yeah, if you can place things.
Yeah. But
some people have trouble with that.
Well, yeah. One issue that comes up when you're recording drums is, of course, you like to get it in a certain spot where you think it's going to sound really good, but then you also can't have it being compromising the performance of the drummer. I was like, yeah, that sounds great with that snare mic right there, but now I can't hit it, So
hit the mic instead.
Right.
Make that the snare sound.
Yeah. So those little issues in getting into the kit, and depending on how you're mounting them, if you just got boom stands or whatever, you have to finagle a little bit to get in there and do that. But spending a little time just with that, just essentially pointing the mic at the somewhat of the center of the drum, will get you at least halfway there.
Halfway, just halfway.
Just half. But yeah, as with anything, take care of most stuff before you, or when you start tracking, make sure it sounds as good as you can, and your job just gets easier on the flip side, so to speak. So
yeah,
anything that you'd like to add to that?
Well, when it comes to dealing with phasing post-recording, if you've done as good a job as you possibly can, time alignment plugins tend to help a lot.
Yes.
Specifically, the one I really like is the Eventide Ultra Precision Time Align plugin, or actually, it's just called Precision Time Align, I think.
Right.
It's pretty
you talked
badass.
highly of that before. Yeah.
Yeah. The great thing about it is it can time align up to a 64th of a sample.
I
How
still
they
don't
do that, I
understand how
don't
that
understand
works.
either, but it's pretty wild that it can be done. So,
Yeah,
yeah, it's pretty badass.
right. And even if you don't use a plugin, you can obviously just, every DAW will work a little bit different, but you can just move things by X amount of samples. You can do it just visually. You can measure it. You can do that, or if you're really brave, just use your ear, right? But
That's way too brave for me. Damn it, I don't like to use my ears. I got to see everything.
yeah,
No, I'm just kidding.
right.
I think one of the things though that can make that tough is if you're using things like in Logic, they have the phase aligned audio in groups. So when I track drums, I always use the quantized or the phase aligned audio editing feature in the
Yes,
group settings before even tracking drums so that everything stays together. Because if you track multiple takes, your takes
right.
need to remain phase aligned, and you can't have one take of like the hi-hat in one take and then use the kick from another take, because that won't be aligned properly, so to speak, with the takes that you're using. So the kit might sound funny at that point.
Right.
So there's that, which is why the plugin comes in handy, because Logic will still take care of the actual audio being phase aligned at its point of reference, and then the plugin can then change that relationship in time a little bit.
Right. Right. Yeah, when I do that, I tend to always, comp the drums, comp the takes, whatever is going to be used in this song. And then I will, generally print those first, and then I will start preparing and doing the phase alignment type of thing. And so everything is locked. It's not moved. Oh, there's a snare from here. I would never do that. I would always use, if there's a section of the song where it needs to be
phase lock audio.
yes, phase lock audio. See, now you threw me off. No, so I will
because
do
I got
all
a good
that.
curveball.
Right. So I did all that after all the comping from different takes, if there are any. I will do the minutia editing before I again start mixing and all this kind of stuff.
Minutia editing. There's a new term for you.
Yeah. Extra bonus points for me, huh?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So one thing I guess we should talk about just briefly.
Just one.
Just one,
because we've
briefly,
touched on quite a few
before
today.
we move on. Is in your experience, do you have? I think you're mostly doing drums, programming drums these days. But do you have any favorite microphones or anything like that that you like to use?
Well, the handy dandy thing on a snare drum is the SM57.
Yes.
That's pretty much a go-to for the high-end crack.
Yeah, and then the drummer can freely just bash the crap out of that too, and you won't
High
be
SPL
crying rivers
right
of
there.
blood. Yeah, because it's going to cost you $100 to replace it. So
right. For kick drums, I think the Audix, is it the D6 by Audix? Can't remember. But I think it's the D6 that's a really nice kick drum sound. Another thing that I've done in the past that I really dig in getting a very full kick drum sound is to actually run a speaker in reverse in front of the kick drum to get what is like a sub-type sound out of it. So you're using an actual speaker as your microphone.
Right.
They actually, I think there's companies out that specifically make setups for that, so you don't have to jerry rig a speaker for yourself. In terms of toms, usually I'm a big fan of Audix mics on drums, and so I generally tend to go with Audix brand microphones on drums.
Yeah.
For the overheads though, on that KM84s, the Telefunken KM84s. No, Neumann makes the KM84. I'm sorry. The Neumann KM84s are great overhead mics, as are Telefunken M82. the M260s, I think they are, that are kind of like the KM84s.
Could be. I've used the M82s in the past. Also Telefunken. I like those. And no, I'm sorry. That's not. I'm getting my mics mixed up. The Shure.
It's so easy to do.
SM81s. Yeah. No, the reason I say Telefunken is I was recently in a position to try out a different kick mic, and that is the M82, the Telefunken M82.
Yes.
And that one had a couple of interesting features. That it had a top end boost, and it also had a dip in the low end. So my first thought was, okay, well, if it's a kick drum mic, how is this, dip gonna affect it? Right. And I was really, really surprised because when I had the dip engaged and the top boost engaged, it was by far the best setting on that kick drum. Now, the dip, I think, is relatively high. I want to say it's in about 100 maybe.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I don't have the details in front of me, but that and engaging, I think it's like a 6 dB boost in like the 4K range or something, but it's a shelf, I think.
Okay.
And I was really, really impressed. It sounded really, really good. So
another good overhead set, and this is funny because it might seem like a weird overkill, is the Sennheiser's. God, now I'm gonna forget the number. Sennheiser makes a great overhead mic too.
Right. Yeah. Now, when it comes to overheads, what method do you usually do? Do you do like the cross pattern, or do you like a spaced pair type of thing, or what do you prefer?
It depends on the value.
Don't say it.
It depends on the value of what you want the drums to do, which almost becomes, well, it doesn't even become, it's program dependent on the value that you want the drums to have in the mix in terms of their spatial left-rightness. And sometimes it will be the cross-X pattern. Right. Sometimes it will be this kind of pattern. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it's straight down on both. Right. Overhead, just straight over where you want the most reflections coming off of a cymbal area, so to speak, right. Or a tom area, or however you want it to sound. Right. So it really becomes dependent upon how you want the drums to sit in the mix in a stereo field, because obviously doing something where you're crossing the X's like this, right. You're going to be getting a much wider left-right than if you do this or even this. In my experience. Yeah,
I've experimented with those as well. I think, at least at this point, I'm a big fan of the spaced pair.
The spaced pair?
Yeah. So,
well, space pair of this or space pair of that?
No, straight down, where I take a measurement from the snare and essentially form a triangle to the overheads. I found that I got a decent blend of the kit and enough of the enough separation, I suppose, from the kit pieces or the crashes and the
well, and then the next thing you have to do is you have to listen to the playing, and if you listen to how the wash of a crash hit happens, because that's where you have to pay attention to, again, phasing issues based on setup is how the crashes will sound when they wash in the room. Sometimes you want that phase, other times not so much. Yeah, no, that can be a challenge, and I would say, especially if it's a drummer that might be a little aggressive. So by the time they get to those crashes, let's say that you do like a crash ride type of thing, and you generally perform at a certain dynamic, and then just bashing the crap out of that, come chorus or whatever, and that can be problematic. Yes. So You know what else can be problematic?
What is that?
Drummers' timing.
Yes, that can be problematic. Um, so ideally you have a drummer that is comfortable playing to a click.
Well, yeah, yes and no. But part of it is if you're tracking things separately, then obviously it's very ideal to have a click track going so you can line everything up. There are instances when you are attempting to correct a drummer's timing and it messes with the sound value of the drums, at which point you need to start layering sounds with samples sometimes.
Yeah.
Or sometimes the drummer just can't hit and you need to layer a sound in anyway.
That, or, it needs just a little bit of help in the arrangement if you have a big, thick arrangement and you need another snare to kind of stack on top of there. But same thing with kicks, or toms for that matter.
Yep.
So it is possible in software to do that now. And I know we're both Logic users, so Logic does that actually quite well.
Yes.
When it extracts a MIDI track from, if you're choosing the snare track or the kick, whatever you're trying to do, and you can just trigger a different sample from that. I would very, very rarely replace something completely unless it's something that's really wrong with it. But that probably
has to
means
be really wrong.
Yeah, it has to be really wrong. And if I'm the engineer on that session, it's my fault. So I'm going to do
you will hang for it.
Right, and I shall hang for it. Yeah, so a lot of things to think about, and not only technical things with mic placement and all this kind of stuff, but obviously things that you mentioned, where listening for the drummer's dynamic and that kind of thing.
Consistency in hitting.
Yeah, consistency, I guess, is a better term to use.
Their intent.
Right. So another question that I think you and I have different opinions on, but yet not. But that is the, do you generally track a room mic?
Oh, yes.
Yeah?
Yes.
Why?
Because if the room is good, everything else can be made good. I like space, and to dial it in, it helps to have a good room sound. To throw all the drums through a reverb plugin is not the same thing as having it in the room. So,
no, this is true.
The room, I should say. So it's not a bad idea if you have the inputs and everything else to do it, to get a room track, whether it's a stereo room track or a mono room track. It helps. More often than not, I generally just use a mono room mic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I generally use one too. A lot of times, though, I don't end up using it. But a big factor there is, of course, how do the drums sound in the room?
Yes.
If it's not a great sounding room, then, hey, let's record this crappy room for posterity.
But you can do weird things with it. Like you can run it through distortion and get some crazy effects to use inside the mix subtly or not so subtly, depending on what you want to do.
Sure. But again, that depends on what kind of track and stuff that you're doing, right? If you're doing it, let's say that I think it'd be a great idea to do if you're doing like an indie rock track or something where it's a little bit more of that live feel. Then you can get away with a little bit more experimentation, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
But you definitely don't want to distort the crap out of a jazz ensemble unless you're really pushing boundaries.
Jazz on steroids,
right? And then I think also, in my experience, again, the more dense if you have more of a dense rock track, it's hard to fit all that in there because you really want the attack and the presence of the drum. So in that case, I might have it in there a little bit. A lot of times I don't. But that's, up to taste. So whatever you like to do.
That's right. Program dependent. Take yet 2 more shots because we've said that a couple times.
Yeah,
now.
no, but you said something that's really important, I think, though. If you
Uh-oh.
if you have the input, an extra input,
Yeah.
and throw up a drum or a room mic. It's not bad. You don't have to use it, so you might want to have it there.
Yes.
But yeah. So there's a quick crash course in drum recording.
Drum ideas, anyway.
Right. But as with everything, use your ear best you can. There's no right or wrong way to do something. It's just tried and true stuff.
There's some things that might be ultimately wrong. It's just whether or not you choose to use them.
Right. Well, let's use the term experimental, shall we?
Yeah, there you go. It becomes very experimental.
Right. But there are obviously ways of now. There's a lot of information out there that you can find for, miking techniques and this and that. But just using your ear, trying to get up as much of the sound of the drum or overheads as possible in a pleasing way. And one thing to take into consideration too is like when you're positioning your mic, if you're placing it in a certain way that it's actually going to pick up more leak from something else, you might want to think about mic placement and that kind of thing.
Gotcha.
So, what's the other thing? The
Sounds
last
like
thing
you
I
need
wanted.
depends on the drum kit.
Yes. Well, no, but I mean, but if you have
No. Depends. The undergarments, leak catchage.
right, but if you're, let's say that you're miking your snare, right? You might not want to point the mic toward the hi hat, or
It's probably
get
not
too
a
much
good
of that
idea
kind
to
of
do
stuff.
that.
So,
Usually, I take the mic in from opposite of the hi hat,
right.
so
Yeah.
it's pointed away from it. That's just me.
Yeah, I like to have it pointed toward the drummer as much as possible, so kind of avoid any kind of leakage from if there are floor toms or anything like that as well. Less of an issue, but yeah, you definitely want to try to be a little careful with that hi hat. And that's another question actually we didn't talk about yet. But do you spot mic the hi hat, or do you just let the overhead deal with that?
Well, program dependent. Take a shot. Sometimes you need to have that directional value on the hi-hat. Sometimes you don't.
Yeah. So if you have,
in
for
that
example,
regard,
let's say that it's
that's how I would do it.
It's a funk track, let's say, and what's going on with the hi-hat is very, very important to the groove. You definitely, or I would say definitely, have a separate hi-hat track. But again, depending on the inputs you have and all this kind of stuff, what you need, if you got your Peter Criss toms and you need all the mics for those, you might have to sacrifice your hi-hat mic. Because there are times too where I've tracked a hi-hat mic and I just feel that I have enough of it in the overheads where I ultimately don't need it. But as you said, if it's nice to have it there too.
Yep.
So yeah, hi-hat mics and drum mics and overheads and all that kind of fun stuff.
Oh my.
Yeah. So yeah, I think that's enough for me, Jody. Do you have anything that you'd like to add?
Not at the moment, but we could just say in a future episode.
Yes.
We'll be talking actually about drum programming.
Yes.
Like full on.
Right.
Full on.
Full on that, which is something that at least I enjoy doing as well. So.
Yeah, you are a drum programming nut.
Woohoo! Yay! Yeah. Okay. Well, that's gonna do it for me then, Jody.
Alrighty.
Have a fantastic rest of the day, and I'll talk to you soon, my friend.
We'll work on it. And for all of you out there inside the recording studio land, we will see you later.
Thanks for listening.